Copper has never been a very popular metal in jewelry. Everything was geared towards silver and gold. And then a few years ago, it jumped in price. I mean, ludicrous price. And people started wanting to work with this, but they were afraid to work with the silver. So we started going to the next similar metal that worked the same way, and we went to copper. And we're finding that copper it's friendly, it's inexpensive, it's very forgiving. Anything you do with it, it will work. The colors, the way that it works, the affordability, it's the new silver. Hi, I'm Kim St. Jean, and today we're going to be working with copper, and I'm going to be sharing some pretty easy techniques to work with copper. Copper has become popular because of the inexpense of it and the availability of it. And in the past, it was thought of as a practice material or a scrap metal, kind of a costume jewelry type medium, but nowadays it has become a forerunner in your jewelry making. One of the beliefs was that it was more difficult to work with because you had to have higher flames, you had to have different temperatures, but we're finding that it's a lot easier to work with than people thought. If you can work in sterling silver, then you can work in copper. If you can work in copper, then you can work in sterling silver. So we're going to start out with looking at the tools that you would need. The nice thing about it is you don't have to have any really specialty tools, and you can get very easily obtained inexpensive tools. We'll start with our torch. The torch that I'm going to use today is one that you can get on Amazon. You can go through restaurant supplies. It's a Sterno professional culinary torch, and it's used in the restaurant industry, and it runs on butane gas. And the nice thing about it is the torch head attaches to the can, and you don't have to continuously refill it. When you purchase it, you open up the collar, you unlock it. You can get these cans at your restaurant supplies and Oriental grocery stores. They're easily obtained. They're inexpensive. You can tell you're getting the right can because it has this little red top instead of a aerosol can lid. That way you can make sure you're getting the correct collar here. You remove the lid, pop the torch down, hold the collar, and spin. Turn this counterclockwise. Let it run for a second and sputter because there's an air chamber locked inside and you want to get that air out. So you get it going and then you click and you're ready to go. You do not have to hold the trigger, so that enables you to move your hand further away from the flame to get you further away from the heat. When using a torch, you have a torch zone. If you're sitting at your seat and you put your hands in front of you, this is your torch zone. Your torches never go out of this zone. So for these particular cans, it's very important that you always start them in an upright position. If you tilt them to start them, you allow an air bubble to get inside, and then it will put out kind of an orange and yellow flame, which is kind of frightening. It's not really dangerous, but it's frightening because it's big and bushy. And if that happens, all you do is just pull it back up to an upright position and it will go away. But if you'll start it standing up, and you always keep your hands on the torch. Never let go of the torch. Start in an upright position. With your dominant hand, you turn it counterclockwise. Hit the trigger, you're ready to work. Before you start, move your hand down. Pick up a tool in your right hand or in your dominant hand, because human nature is to reach out and grab, and you never want to reach out and grab anything. And you want to train yourself to use your torch in your non-dominant hand, because all of the skills we're going to do today, you have to use your dominant hand to manipulate. So you want to use your torch in your non-dominant hand. You pick it up, you use it in front of you, and you turn it off in front of you. Your torch is never ever used, and turn it off counterclockwise, out to the side, above your head. We have all these creative places where we start our torches. It's always directly in front of you, used directly in front of you, and turned off directly in front of you. These are slightly top heavy, so make sure you move them away from the edge of your workstation. All right, simple tools. We've got a crock pot with some pickle in it. Pickle is an acid bath that will remove all the copper oxides that our metal is going to get on it as we work. It's very simple. It's not a dangerous thing. When you say acid, people get scared. It's not dangerous. What I actually use a swimming pool supply. I use pH down, which you can get at any of your home supply stores. It's neutralized very easily with baking soda, and then it can even be returned to the soil or disposed of at your local recycling centers. We have a quench bowl. I have a pair of wire cutters. I have a chain nose plier, a round nose plier, and a flat nose plier. I have a pair of wrapping taps. I have a chasing hammer, and I have some stone setting tools, a pair of shears, a pick, and a pair of cross-lock tweezers. We're going to be using a brazing rod today. Brazing rods, this one particular, is made of phosphorus and copper. And the nice thing about this is you do not have to use any kind of a flux, and you do not have to prepare your metals. You do not have to pickle in between joints. When I say braze, people think of solder. A solder is when you have two metals and you're going to join them together, and you bring these metals up to a point where they get to a melt stage, and it creates chambers in between in the metals, and then the solder material flows and binds those so that you have one continuous seam. What we're going to do today, we're going to use a braze. So a braze, you put the two metals together. The brazing material melts before these two metals do, and it bonds them together like a super glue or a glue gun on steroids. It's just a separate bond. It doesn't put the two together. It's more of an attachment. And that seam is super strong, stronger than the metal itself. So we're going to be using the brazing rods. Cross-lock tweezers. And if you notice, I have little flags on my brazing rods. A couple reasons for that. The brazing rods, when you purchase them, come in 20-inch sections. You cut those in half so you don't poke your eye out while you're working. And I put the little blue tab. If you pick up the business end, you really only want to do that once. So this tells me to pick it up on this end. The other thing is when you start working, we all know we start out with a nice clean desk, and about 30 minutes into our project, we have everything we own on the center of the table. Well, this tells me that this is a brazing rod, not a piece of 14-gauge wire. And the other thing is the rods themselves don't get hot, but the proximity to the torch with my hand does get hot. So what I do is I take the little flag, I put it in my cross-lock tweezers, it falls down, it enables me to hold this straight out and keep my hand away from the area I'm going to be working. So a couple reasons to put the flags on there. An option. You don't have to do this, but this is the way I do it. You can use this rod all the way down until it's just a little dot and then actually place it where you want it. But you have to remember that when you get to about this point, you need to remove the flag because it does catch on fire. All right. Today we're going to do a project that I call the Greek Goddess. Now this just happens to be the vehicle that I'm going to show you these techniques. This doesn't have to be the project you do. What you want to see is how I'm using the brazing rods, how I'm connecting the metals, and then taking those techniques and applying them to other projects that you may want to do. I'm going to show you a couple different ways, samples of how this same technique is used. The one we're going to do today is going to be very similar to this one. We're going to be using copper bezel wire. We're going to be using 12-gauge wire, 14-gauge wire, 16-gauge wire, 18-gauge wire. It really depends on the size of your stone and what you want to use. It's going to be a bail to make a pendant, and I have this option. I have this option of bail, and then let's say you have a stone that's not more of a cabochon shape, you can even do this option. So it's the same techniques, just setting them up in different ways. But the one that we're actually going to be working on today, we're going to be using this stone with this bail technique. Alrighty, we're going to start out with our bezel. This is not the type of tape that you do stained glass with. It has no adhesive on it, and it's a little thicker than that. But it's also not strip, and you have to be very careful because if you order strip, it's much thicker and it's harder to manipulate it around the organic shapes of your stone. Now, the stone you choose can be a cabochon, it can be an agate, it could be just about anything you want it to be. I like natural stones with some rough, and I found that these kind of thicker stones work really well. But again, it can be any stone you want it to be. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our bezel wire and we're going to go around the stone. And I'm not going to try to push it and make it go into every one of these little crevices. I just kind of want a tight edge around it. I pull the whole thing off. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my shears now and I'm going to cut between both pieces of the metal. That way, when I go to join these, I will be putting the ends together from the same cut, and I'm not trying to match up two different cuts. So I take my shears and I cut through both pieces. That gives me a very small piece of scrap, but that's worth it to avoid the aggravation of trying to get two ends to meet that were cut from separate cuts. So I'll take this, and usually what I do is I take my pliers and I straighten that out. Now, the shape of your wire when you're trying to solder your bezel together does not have to be the shape of the stone. A lot of times you'll have a square, or you'll have a triangle, or you have some kind of an organic shape, and you're trying to get this all to be the shape of the stone, and it doesn't matter right now. All I want to do right now is just get these two ends together. So the easiest way to do that is to make it a circle like you would with a jump ring. So you make it a circle, and I'm going to point it out that way so you can see clearly. And make it overlap, just like closing a jump ring. And then when you bring it together, the two ends will meet. Okay, there we go. My two seams are together here, and there's a tiny bit of overlap. That's okay. If there was a little bit of space, that's okay, because unlike solder, your brazing rods will fill up gaps. So I've even gone in, if I've accidentally melted something and built a little wall with this, you can actually construct with this. So it's really nice. You don't want a huge overlap because then your bezel might not fit, but a little bit of an overlap is okay. It's not ideal, but sometimes that's the only way we can get these to meet. So now I'm going to take my brazing rod, and even though this doesn't get hot, I could hold it in my hands, but this is going to be an intense big flame. That's what's awesome about this torch, is it's 2,500 degrees, just like if you're using any of your other smaller butane torches. You ask, does it get hot enough? That's the correct question. Yes, it does get hot enough, but does it have a big enough flame to get everything that you need hot at one time hot? And that's where these little torches don't do the job that you're wanting them to do when you're dealing with copper. And the biggest test is always, can you draw a bead on the bottom of a 16 gauge wire? Well, most of your blazers and your other little torches won't do that because the flame is 2,500 degrees, but it's pencil thin, so it doesn't transfer the heat through the whole piece. This one is 2,500 degrees, but because it's a big flame, it heats up a big space at one time, and so it works the best with copper. This torch, I can do my silversmithing, I can do my enameling, I can do all of those things because of that big flame. So we're going to come in here, and we're going to make a big flame. Hold this like a pencil. It's not natural to come in and do this. You got your elbow in the air. This is not how you would go to draw a picture. This is not how you would go to eat your dinner, okay? You want to do what's natural. And if you have any shaking in your hands or anything, support your arms on the table. Support yourself so that you're not up in the air trying to shake. Now any new project you're going to shake anyway. So we're going to come in here, and because this heats up very quickly, I'm going to have this getting warm, and then when this glows red, I come in and I touch, and my bezel is done. Okay? Now, one thing I want to do, I'm going to go ahead and quench this, which means cool it off. I want to show you what I mean by heat, because with the brazing rods, we just have a copper phos brazing rod. We don't have hard, medium, easy, extra easy. So every joint's going to melt at the same temperature. With that, you have to learn the zones of your torch. And with the zones of your torch, if you start your torch, it doesn't matter what torch it is, it could be a acetylene torch, oxygen torch, doesn't matter. With the zones of your torch, notice I keep my torch straight up and down, okay? This gives me this beautiful orange circle. In the center of this circle is my hottest zone, and it's about a ½ inch away from the tip of the blue cone. As I work out here, my flame gets cooler. If I go closer, now I have this black dot in here. There's no heat there. Now my heat is out here. So I'm concentrating on heating this where there's less heat. I'm melting everything around here. So if I bring it back up, there's my continuous heat. So to remember that, because we get anxious and we think if we get closer and closer and closer that our heat is going to go faster. But remember this, if you hear the ocean, you're too close. So back up. If you hear the ocean, you're too close. Well, the bezel wire was very thin, so what I used was this outer heat here. I didn't need this heavy heat. I only needed this outer heat. So as I progress through the project today, you're going to notice that a lot of times my torch is further away or in different positions of what you would think natural, because I'm not aiming it at exactly the spot where I'm wanting to work. I'm going to coax the heat in to the hotter temperatures by using my torch flame rather than different temperatures of melting solders. Now, this is a solderite soldering board. I really like these because they don't retain heat, and so I can flip it over and I have a nice cool spot to work here. And when I silversmith, I use silver solder paste, and if you're going to use a paste, you can't have a board that retains heat because it will make your paste flow everywhere. They have come out with the same chemicals of this rod in a paste. So we do have a phos copper paste now, if that's something you're interested in using. So it would be the same chemicals of this, but in a paste form. All right, we have this, and you notice I left a little clump on there. That's a good thing. I know mostly you want to get the, oh, it's got a clump and I want to sand this off, file this off. But what we want to do is we want to utilize that in our next joint. And I don't have to pickle in between stages. I can go right on to the next stage. These brazing rods are what your artists use who build statues and fountains and things like that. And I was actually introduced to these by a very accomplished copper statue artist. So this is what you would use if you want to build large things. But what I've done is I've worked on it and worked on it and worked on it so that we can do small things with it. All right, so there's our bezel. Now comes the time that we fit it to our stone. All right, and now's when I'll pinch and crease and make sure that my stone fits inside my bezel. And this is going to be my top, and I'm going to put my bail on top here. So I wanted to make sure that everything fit that way. And I'm going to utilize that blob of solder in my next joint. So I've got that in. And putting a bezel on a stone is kind of like putting on freshly cleaned jeans in the morning. You kind of do that jean dance. You have to put it on and then squish it through, and then put it on and squish it through, and get it to where it fits smoothly in and out through top and bottom. Now, this particular project doesn't have a base what we're going to do is we're going to create the strength with the wires that come around it. So this is going to always be kind of noodly, and it's not going to keep its shape. So in between each process, each section that we do, we're going to put the stone back in. That being said, you've got to remember to take the stone out before you do your solder joint. So we've got it in there. I've got the shape I want. I remove the stone, and now I know where I'm going to put my bail. Okay, we're going to make our bail out of 12 gauge copper. Again, this could be any gauge you want. It could be any shape you want. I'm going to use round today. And to me, when you're designing, here's my stone, here's going to be my bail. You should judge it by the stone. And my rule with bails is that whatever the width of the stone, the bail should be similar. If you take a nice, beautiful stone and you put this little bitty bail on top, it kind of looks like Fat Man in a little coat. So to me, even if I had a lot of metal out here, I would want my bail to be at least the size of my stone. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to exaggerate this one a little bit, and I'm going to come out over the top. Now, I call these bails the torii bail because if you think of those beautiful tories in Japan where you have, you know, the beam going across the top and the beams coming down, that's a torii. And so to me, that's how this is going to look. It's going to have this torii look on top, where if you look, that's this piece here that we're going to do. So I'm going to take this. Now, anybody who's ever worked with wire knows that 12 gauge is pretty tough stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to anneal this. Now, what anneal means is that you're going to make it soft again. If you think of your metal as a container, in this container there's a crystalline structure, and when that crystalline structure is in a perfect state, all of the little particles in there are lined up nice and neat, and they have order, and everything's in its place, and there's a place for everything. And you think of it kind of like library books in a library stacked on the shelves. As we work it, bend it, fold it, hammer it, do all the things we do to metal, we disrupt that. So think of it as all of those books falling off the shelves. Once they all start falling off the shelves, there's no more room to move inside there. And that's when we consider our metal work hardened. And if you keep on working a work hardened metal, it's going to eventually crack because there's just no more space for anything in there to move. So we're going to anneal it. In copper, we anneal until it glows a low orange, or it has just a low luminescence of orange. And then that's putting all those books back up on the shelf and making everything nice and neat again. So I'm going to anneal this. Every metal has a different rule for annealing. Sterling is a much lower temperature, so the best way to do sterling so that you don't get that meltdown is you can take a permanent marker and just draw a line on your metal, and when you heat it up, the marker disappears, then your silver is annealed. With copper, I can throw it into the water and quench it immediately. Doesn't hurt it. But with any of your alloys, which are two metals mixed together like sterling silver or brass or bronze, you want to wait a few seconds. And so I do the old 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi game, and then I quench them. Because if you quench them right away, the metals can separate and you'll get them to crack. So for this one, we're going to heat it up. Have that tool in your hand, and I'm just going to heat it up until it glows. And notice I'm doing the whole wire because copper is a tremendous conductor of heat. And so if I start just here, it wants to disperse the heat evenly. So if I go ahead and heat the whole thing, I can make it happen faster. So now I'm going to focus in one area and see how it's luminescing. That's annealed. So I can cut this off now, pick this up, and if you're ever working with long pieces of wire, don't pick them up in the center because they'll swing, and then that hot end will come up and swing and hit your hand. Pick them up from the ends and then drop them in your water. And they're cooled pretty much immediately. So now I have this nice soft metal that I'll be able to manipulate. I'm going to move this aside, and I'm going to move my bench block in. And my bench block is an old antique iron. And I'm going to use a domed chasing hammer because I'm going to paddle the ends. And if I use a domed chasing hammer, it gives me a nice smooth paddle at the end. Paddling is a major skill to accomplish because you can do so many things with wire that have paddled ends. You can make bells, you can make chain links, these earrings. There's a paddled bell with a rivet through the middle. You can do a lot of amazing things if you learn how to paddle smoothly. The idea is you take your dome side and you take your end. Don't aim for above the cut. Aim for the cut. And aim for the middle of the hammer so that as you strike and it slides. So it thins out the metal. So we come in here like this. And I work better away from me. So I'm going to come in. And I'm right-handed, so mine tend to want to curve to the right. So if you want to make it nice and straight, go about halfway and then flip it. And that makes a nice paddle on this end. And I'll do the same on this end. About halfway, flip it. And that gives me a nicely paddled piece for my Tory bale. Going to bring this in. And this is going to position right there. Now I want this in the middle of my bezel wire. If I do it down here, it's going to be at the base of my bezel wire. So I'm going to have to use what we call furniture. So I'm going to remove my stone. And one way to do furniture is I like to use dimes. So I have dimes, and I'm going to take 2 dimes there, and I'm going to take 2 dimes there. And I'm going to go ahead and flatten this just a little bit. That's just aesthetics. And remember that clump of brazing that was on there? That's what's going to hold this onto my bale. So hopefully by doing that, I should have enough that it's going to take this, and by the heat, I'm going to get it to spread and connect the 2 pieces together. Now, I have it out here, setting it up, but so that I can see it, I'm actually going to turn it facing me so that I can see. Actually, I'm going to do it this way. That way I can see the solder flow through here. Now, remember we talked about torch zones. The bezel is very thin, and bezels melt very easily. If you've ever worked with a bezel, you know this. But my 12 gauge wire is very thick, so it's going to take a lot longer for my 12 gauge wire to get up to the temperature for this to attach than it is for my bezel wire. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that circle of my torch out here. And I'm going to bring it out here, and it's going to heat this. And the nature of any kind of solder or braze is that it wants to go to the heat. So that blob of braze that I have there is going to want to come to my heat. And hopefully by having my torch out here, I'm heating up the wire, and it's going to be hotter than the bezel, and it's all going to hook together without one melting over the other. So I'm going to start my torch, and I'm going to come up and over. And notice how I'm holding the torch? I don't have my elbow up in the air. That's just not comfortable. Have my pick in my hand, even though I really don't need it. It's just a safety thing. And there we go. Look at there. Already attaching. And by doing this, I can get it to smooth out and run. And so now I have a space of almost a whole inch holding this together, because I took that ball of solder that was there, or braze, and made it flow. And by going back and forth, I got it to just flow right along the seam. So I can pick this up now. Brazing takes a little longer to cool than a typical solder, so you want to not pick it up immediately after it has flowed because it will come apart. You got to give it just a little bit of time to cool and solidify. So you can pick it up and we quench. Now, our nature is we remember this is hot and we're very careful not to touch this, but we forget and we pick up the money. And so what you want to do is you want to remember that you've got to quench that money before you reposition it or pick it up. Because in our minds, money's not typically hot. So we forget and we pick it up. So now we have our piece. And since this is not a solid thing, I'm going to make sure that my stone still fits. And we've got the top part of our piece done. All right, so we've accomplished the bezel and we've accomplished the Tory bar part of our bail. Now we're going to do the part that your chain or your ribbon or your leather or whatever is going to slide through here. So we're going to do this side type of the bail. Again, do an appropriate size for the piece you're making. My piece is large, so I'm going to stick with 12 gauge wire. And I'm going to make a big loop on here. And so I have my 12 gauge and I'm going to use a wrap and tap. This is one of my favorite tools. And to use the wrap and tap, you need to get into the habit of the rubber. There's a rubber tube on here. Yes, the rubber tube that came in the package was not to be thrown away. It was supposed to stay on the tool. So if you lost it, go to your local aquarium place and get another piece. But you put that on there, and that portion should always be the closest to your body because you're going to work in an away motion. So I'm going to use this largest barrel and I'm going to line it up here, and then I'm going to, with my thumb, press while my right hand rolls. Think of this as a motorcycle handle and you're revving the engine. So you roll. Now you don't take your hands off the end of the plier. You open the plier and you pivot inside, and then you clamp down again, and then you rev your motorcycle again, and then open and pivot inside. And I pulled my wire to the inside so that the length of my wire is the closest to the handle. That way, if I were making a coil of jump rings, I could just continue on. If you put your wire on your other side, then it stops once you hit the edge of the plier. So I can do like this, and see, I can make several nice thick jump rings here. All right, so we've got nice thick jump rings. Now I'm going to take my metal shears, and again, if you remember when I did my bail, I cut through both ends. So I'm not going to worry about cutting next to this cut that's here. I'm going to cut through all of these. Okay. And now I have flush cut jump rings because I used the shears. So I didn't have to pull out the saw. So I've got these, and what I'm going to do, these are not annealed, but I want to keep them that way because what I'm going to do is I'm going to snap this on, and by being nice and hard, it'll stay in the position that I want it in. So I'm going to choose the center, and that's still a little too far away. So I'm going to take my pliers and open it up just a little bit and snap it in place. All right. Now, remember when I did this, I had the dimes up underneath here. And you also recall that this all melts at one temperature, and I've got to virtually melt this again. So I could have a major meltdown here. And my bail is, my Tory bar is in the center of my bezel. So what's going to happen? I melt all this down, can't fight gravity. Gravity's going to come in there regardless of what you want to do. So if I melt this, the weight of these wire is going to pull down, and then my bezel will be down against the bottom of my bezel. My Tory bar will be at the bottom of my bezel again. So what I'm going to do here is you can stack your dimes under there again, or the easy way is if you have an annealing pan, you can take your annealing pan and put your stones up underneath there so that when you come in to solder it, the Tory bar is being supported by the annealing rocks. And so what I'm going to be able to do is just go in there, and the solder that's there might attach it, so I might not have to add any more, but I'm going to be ready just in case, because it went kind of thin. So I'm going to be ready just in case so that I can come in and I can touch just right there and add a little bit more if it needs it. So I'm going to get my brazing rod ready, flag down in the tweezer, drop, and it's ready to go. Always have, as I say, setting your stage. Have all the tools that you're going to need during the process ready and available for you so that once you start the torch, everything's on the right side of whichever side you're using, but it's there and you're not reaching over to get to it. So actually, I should probably have my quench bowl over here, but I'm not quenching till my torch is over or turned off. So we're going to have everything ready that we might possibly need on this side and ready to go. So we're going to start our torch. I'm going to pick up my tweezer. Now, don't want this to get too hot, but these are both pretty big metals. So again, I'm coming out here. And I always have my brazing rod in the vicinity of the heat, not directly in the heat, but in that area so they can be preheating. If this is cold and this is not hot enough, it will stick to it and you have a new component on your piece. So when I see that metal start to glow slightly is when I want to go in and touch. Don't worry about the pumice. If it attaches, it falls right off when you quench. So it's getting up to temperature. I'm going to come in and touch. And I'm done. Now, I make this look pretty simple, but I've done this a lot. It takes practice to learn when to go in and touch, kind of like the old Kenny Rogers song, you got to know when to hold them and when to fold them. It takes practice to know when to go in to touch and when to come out. People ask me all the time, well, how long does one brazing rod last? Well, it depends on how good you get. You could use an entire brazing rod trying to get that on there if you haven't practiced or if you haven't tried. So don't get frustrated. The first one I ever took, I burnt 3 bezels. I mean, I just said words that I usually don't say and had a hard time at it. But as I do it, it gets easier and easier, and you recognize the signs of the color of the metal, of the temperature, and you learn when to touch and when not to touch. So don't get frustrated. It's actually quite simple. You just have to practice, just like anything else. The first one you do is not going to be perfect. So I'm going to move my annealing pan out of the way, and I'm going to bring so now I have all of this attached. And I'm going to put my stone in. And the nice thing about this is that you can choose the side that looks the prettiest to be your front. So here we have this much so far. Still haven't pickled. Now you can pickle every joint if you want to. Just maybe you're the type that needs to see it nice and clean before you know what step to go to next, but you don't have to. So everything still fits, and I'm ready to go on to the next step. Okay, so we have our bezel and our bail made. Now we're going to do the grapevine wires, which they're an aesthetic of our finished product, but mainly they're what's going to give some strength to this piece and hold the stone in. So what I'm going to do, you can use, in this piece, I went with thicker wire, and I used, again, like 14 gauge for this support wire, which is a little difficult to work with. On this project, I'm going to go with 16 and have it be a little thinner, but a little bit more flowy. So again, I'm not going to give any magic lengths to this because there's too many factors involved. You have to decide. Normally, I cut these about 12 inches. And I don't usually measure, but I'm pretty good at estimating 12 inches. And I'm going to ball each end. And what ball means is that I'm going to heat the end until a little ball forms on the end of the wire. So whenever you are measuring, if you're one of those people that has to measure everything, always add about 1/4 of an inch to your wire so that you will have an adequate amount of wire to ball the ends. If not, then your measurement will be off. So we're going to ball both ends. And even though it's probably not going to get hot in the center, I would still recommend that you hold it in your tweezers. Now, balling wire seems to be a difficult technique for a lot of people. So I would like to do a little sample first, just to show you what it looks like to ball a piece that's not 12 inches long. The trick is you want to use your tweezers. I like cross-lock tweezers. You can use regular tweezers, you can use locking, whatever, but what you want to do is you want to use this very, very tip. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to put it at the tip of my tweezers, at the tip of my wire. And the reason I've done that is it's going to let me heat this whole piece of wire up, and by having it at the tip, my tweezers are not going to become a heat sink. Remember, copper is a conductor of heat. It wants to transfer, it's like a train, it wants to transfer the heat everywhere it can. So it wants to send the heat up here and transfer it all out here. So if I have it like this, it's going to focus most of my heat right there where the tweezers are. So I'm going to do it like that. Then what I'm going to do, again, remember you start your torch up in front of you. Always work over a surface that if the ball drops off, it's not going to burn. Never do it over your lap because those little balls burn. And those of us who are beaters, when the ball falls, don't catch it because it is hot. Here I have my flame, and as I pointed out, I have my blue triangle here. I have my bushy flame out here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold my wire 1/2 inch away from the tip of that blue cone, and there's my hollow spot that I showed you in the circle. We're going to come in here, and eye depth perception is a major issue here. So if you have this particular torch, you can put your hand on the head of the torch and you go all the way down, and then see how that's glowing now, and see that orange light coming out the back? That means I was in the sweet spot. Now, the progression of the ball is it starts out and it creates a point, and then it comes and it wobbles up this direction, and then it wobbles up this direction, and then it looks almost like it's going to fall off the wire, and then all of a sudden it goes right up in the center. When it pops up to the center of your wire is when you remove it from the heat. If you go past that, then the ball's going to fall off. If you have it too far up the wire, so if your flame is coming in here, you're going to actually cut the wire in half rather than ball it up. So you always want your flame to be in that 1/4 inch area that I talked to you about. So here we have a balled wire, and we're going to do it like this. So we're going to take this, and I'm going to treat it just like the short one. I get the whole thing hot, and then hold. And there it is. It popped to the right, popped to the left, went to the center. Watch this. You don't want this to swing down on your hand. Get this molten hot. And notice I didn't quench. Whoop, there we go. Now I turn my torch off, and I quench. I'm going to quench both ends, and then I'm going to go to the center, because that center did generate heat. Not much, but it did generate heat. Okay, now I have my wire, and I'm going to come over here, and if you take it into thirds, I'm going to come over here just about 1/3. Okay, and then I'm going to fold that in half, and I'm going to take my pliers, and I'm going to pinch that. So that it looks like a hairpin. All right. Now you take that hairpin, and I don't open it out this way. I'm going to open it this way. So kind of like running legs. And it gives me that neat little curve. All right, so I'm going to put my stone in, make sure I have my shape like I want it. And, yep, everything still fits. I remove my stone. I'm going to take this, and I do things kind of asymmetrically, so I think it looks better to have it kind of off to the side like that. Now, one of these is going to come across the top of the stone, and one of them is going to come across the back of the stone. So you can decide where you want that to be. So I'm actually going to do it opposite. And I'm going to put the short side, because I'm going to bring this long one across the back and then loop it around here. And then I'm going to bring the short one across the front and loop it there. So if you can see, I've got it positioned to where it touches the bezel there and it touches the bezel there. So I'm going to do two little tacks. And this is basically tacking. If you've noticed, everything I've done is like a tack. So I'm just going to tack it right there, and I'm going to tack it right there. So I'm going to pick up my brazing rod. And we are brazing, but sometimes, I mean, we'll say solder. Solder is kind of just a generic term for putting the two metals together. But this whole process has been brazing. So now what I'm going to do is, again, thin wire, thin bezel. It's going to take more heat to get my brazing rod hot than it is to get my area hot. So I'm going to come out here, all the way out here away. I have my brazing rod. See how fast that got hot? We don't want that, or it'll melt. So I've got to get my brazing rod up to temperature. Push that back up against there. And touch. And touch. All right. Now, in the finished product, you're going to see these joints. This is not one of those, it's not like soldering, doing silversmithing where you completely file away all the joints. These joints are going to show in this technique. That's part of it. So we're going to quench. Okay, so I've got all of my solder joints done. Very simple. And we're going to throw it in the pickle, which again is an acid bath. Generally you use Sparax or pH down. This is Sparax today, and we have it in a little crock pot because it's supposed to work warm. And I'm going to throw it in there, and it's going to eat up all of this black stuff. So we're going to come over, make it so it fits, pop it in. And there's no magic amount of time that this takes. It depends on how much fire scale you have on your piece, and it depends on how much pickle you have in there. Big question about pickle. How much pickle do you put into the container? When you buy the pickle, even if you buy Sparax from a jewelry supply, it doesn't tell you how much to use. So this is my rule of thumb. Whatever container I have, I fill it up with water. And then the pickle is a granular, a white granular. So what I do is I just kind of sprinkle it over the top until I have a nice thin coating of the white grains on the bottom of the pickle pot. And then that usually always gives me the appropriate amount. So if it's a big crock pot, it's going to take more. If it's a small crock pot, it takes less. Think of it as putting chili powder in chili or oregano in spaghetti sauce. If you do your piece and you think you put it in there and it seems to take a long time to clean, add a little pickle. If you accidentally put too much, sometimes it'll clump out and you get too much. It'll make it cloudy. But what's going to happen over time is it's going to evaporate, so you just add more water. You don't need to get rid of it or anything. You just add more water. And that's the reason we put the lids on, because it does evaporate. And that's the reason you don't want it, you don't need it boiling, you just need it warm. You always reach into a crock pot with a pair of copper tongs, because it will copper plate any metal that you have in there. Well, we have copper in there, so if I accidentally reached in with my cross-lock tweezers today, it'd be no big deal because I'm copper plating copper, which is a technique you use sometimes. But it's always a good habit to always use the copper tongs. That way you won't forget sometime when you're using silver, or if you're sharing a studio with somebody and they're doing silver and you're doing copper and you reach in with the wrong tweezers, you're going to copper plate their piece. A lot of people believe you need a separate crock pot for copper than you need for silver. Not so. You can all use the same crock pot. They don't transmingle. What happens though is the more copper you use, the more saturated it's going to get, and it's going to start turning blue. That's why if you have a choice, buy a crock pot with a light colored bowl. That way you can tell how blue your pickle is becoming. And if it gets really, really blue, it's saturated, you're going to notice it's going to start not working as well because it's so full of the copper in there. If you have to dispose of it, you take your bowl to a sink and you put baking soda in, and then it neutralizes, and you can just pour it down you can pour it out in the yard. It puts phosphates back in the soil. If it's neutralized, you can flush it. You can dispose of it any way you'd like. If you have a well, I wouldn't flush it. You can take it to a recycling center. They're just going to dispose of it. Always put the water in first and then the powder second. You never put the powder in first and then the water on top. If you accidentally copper plate your neighbor's silver piece by reaching in with the wrong thing, all you do is you just take a little cup of the pickle and you take a cup the same size of peroxide, hydrogen peroxide, mix the two, put the piece in there, and it looks kind of like Efferdent. It just eats the copper plating right off. Contrary to popular belief, you do not have to get rid of the crock pot or the pickle after that has happened. Once the offending object is removed from the pickle is no longer bad. So just because somebody reached in there and copper plated everything that one day, the copper is still perfect, the pot is still perfectly fine once that offending object is out. You don't have to neutralize it and get rid of it and make a whole new pot. All right, so we're going to reach in and we're going to get our piece out. And you notice it doesn't look like shiny copper anymore. This is the stage I call shrimp skin. It looks like boiled shrimp. You know your shrimp's done when it floats to the top and it's pink. Well, it's got this matte pink color to it. This is not something on the copper. This is the copper. When copper is nice and shiny, it's been buffed and polished down. Well, right now, all of the copper particles, because we've shocked it with all that heat, they're all standing at attention. All right. So what you do is you buff it, or you brass brush it, or you smooth it out, and then it becomes the shiny copper again. So it's not anything on there. It's actually the copper that needs to be buffed back down. Okay, I have my piece out of the pickle and it's clean as far as the pickle goes. Now what I have to do is get it bright and shiny. Normally I would use like a soft brass brush, or at this stage you could throw it into a tumbler and get all of the particles shine back down so that it's nice and shiny. Because this is limp and limber, it's better to use like a piece of steel wool. I use 4/0 steel wool and polish this out. But it actually works better for this project if I go ahead and get the stone in there and then do my cleaning, because it's wonky here. There's nothing to hold it together while I clean it. So I'm going to go ahead and stick the stone in so that it actually has its structure. And this is when you really hope everything still fits. Okay, get the stone in there and push down our sides. Now that I have the stone in, you have your stages that you use, your tools you use to set. Now this is not a traditional bezel, so we're not going to do your traditional bezel setting. So I'm actually basically catching this. I'm capturing it in here. So I always start out with a half of a clothespin, because I can go in and burnish all of this down with this clothespin, and I don't have to worry about scratching or chipping my stone. So I can get everything down pretty much, and it can get into all these little crevices. And you kind of start top and then bottom and then side to side, and you get your areas down. Now, right here in this stone, I have a a depression here, and I have all of this metal sticking up. If I just push this over, it's going to be all wrinkled and crumply, and it'll look it'll just look sloppy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my shears, and I'm just going to cut a little niche right there. So then what I'll do is I'll take my clothespin and I'll bezel down that. And then I'll bring this one up over the top. Kind of like when you gift wrap and you have that pleat, or when you make your sheets on your bed. So you can pull that down. And then that one will go right up over the top. And it looks neater than having all of that excess. And you do that in traditional setting also if you have like a stone with corners, like a square or a triangle, something with some drastic corners. You always want to put that little slit in there and then package them over, or else you get drastic puckers. And we're going to put this in here. Now the bezel is not really what's going to hold this stone in. It's kind of like just a frame. So if this is all I had right now, it would not stay. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this wire, a long wire, up over the back. And this is where you can get you have some artistic privilege here. And I'm going to come up over the back, and then I'm going to come up around the Tory bar, and then I'm going to coil it onto the bar. And the way I came up with this is I was thinking of how grapes grow on an arbor, and they have those little filler things that wrap around, and so that's what I was thinking of when I thought of these wires. So I'm going to bring this one over here, so I have one in the front and one in the back, and I'm going to wrap it around. Okay, and then this one can come down here like this. So you've got a wire in the back supporting your stone, and you have a wire in the front supporting your stone, and then you have a little one there to play with. And I have a little extra here. I could do a curly Q, but these vines also have these neat little spirals at the bottom. Now this is where you can get really creative, because this is the aesthetic of it. And you can come in and play with your wire. So what I'm doing here is I'm cinching. I'm tightening the wires. That's a great way to tighten your wires. If you wanted, you could have soldered another wire on. You could take another wire and just coil it on and come around. But I found in working with this that a lot of times less is more. So to not have so much going on, and you're showcasing your metal and you're showcasing your stone, and have less going on actually looks better than having tons of wires wrapping around through there, getting all crazy. All right, so now we are ready to patina this and get it cleaned up. So at this point, I come in here now. I have some structure, so I have some strength here to actually get this cleaned up and looking like copper again. Okay, so we're ready for the liver of sulfur. All right, so we are going to make our liver of sulfur. So I'm just going to put a little bit of this in here. And I like a strong liver of sulfur because I like my pieces to get really dark, and then I lighten them up. So and it usually becomes this kind of light greeny yellow color. But in this pot, you're not going to see it. And This stone is a pretty tough stone, and this is actually a piece of rough. It's fresh cut, hasn't been polished or anything. But a lot of stones can take the liver of sulfur. Your agates, your jaspers, any of your stones that aren't porous, it doesn't hurt them to go into the liver of sulfur. So this stone here, it's not going to hurt to go in. So I'm just going to drop it in. And your liver of sulfur will activate faster if you kind of bring it into the air and then go down, and bring it into the air and go down. And it gets nice and dark. And we all know what it smells like. You get to the point, though, where you don't smell it anymore, which is kind of bad because I've always got it going in my studio, and then a stranger walks in and gives you a really funny look. All right, so nice and black. So it seems kind of weird. You polish it up, and then you turn it black. But that's the process. And now I just quenched it. And I will move this out of the way and dry it off. It always cleans up better, in my opinion, if you dry it off first. Now, whenever you're watching or reading a book or a video or taking classes, and I recommend that you take classes from lots of different people, even in the same techniques, because everything that I do may not work for you. But you can take something that I do and something that another artist does and put them together and make them the way you do things. So just because I do something doesn't make it the only way to do it. It just is what I prefer. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my steel wool and I'm just going to lightly highlight. I don't clean it all off. I highlight. Because I love the rich color that it becomes. And to me, patina, this particular patina, gives it depth. It gives it shadow. It gives it dimension. Just plain out copper, to me, is kind of like paint by numbers. There's no shading. There's no blending. It's just there. So with this, by putting it all together, and then removing, liver sulfuring and removing, I'm able to allow shadowing in between the wires. I'm able to allow, I'm able to let it stay dark in there, to stay dark underneath, so that it's got more layers of texture, more layers of I don't know, just, to me it makes it look so much better. Now, this piece here, I can leave it nice and dark like this. And patina is also the hider of imperfections. So like, remember I told you solder joints are going to show, okay? By the patina, it made them all blend in. And one thing about working with the brazing rods and with any of the copper solders that are available to you right now, they will have a copper color when you're finished. But if you overheat them, if you overcook them, you cook away that copper color. So if you seem to be getting silvery colored seams every time you work, you're probably over firing it. You're not getting it hot quick enough and getting the solder joint made fast enough, and so you're cooking away all of the copper color. Now, this is the finished piece, very organic. Now what I could do is I can leave it kind of matte like this, or I could take this and I could put it in a tumbler, because the tumbler's not going to hurt this stone, and I'm not going to worry about it falling apart, because if it can't survive the tumbler, it's not going to survive anyway. So I could tumble it for about an hour with just a drop of Blue Dawn dishwashing detergent in stainless steel shot, and I have just your rolling tumbler, and it'll give it a really burnished, shiny look, but it will keep all of the shadowing and the dimension that it's got, but it'll make it really burnished. And the difference is, this one I tumbled and this one is not tumbled, and so hopefully you can see the difference. The darkness stays there, the color stays there, but you get this burnished high colors. And this piece is at least 6 to 8 months old. And so you can see the coloring, the natural patina that has come underneath. I've gotten to where, and I know this is bad, but I've gotten to where if I tumble a piece like this, I don't seal it. And it stays shiny like this, and then it has a natural change of color that it acquires itself, and I kind of like that. So that's an option you have. If you're going to leave it matte like this, I would suggest a thin coat of Renaissance wax if you don't want it to change a lot. But that, again, is a choice for you. All right, so we just did this project, and you can see I have several different ways using this particular bale. You can get creative with your bales. This one I call the grapevine bale, and I'm just going to quickly show you how this would be different than doing the other one. A little bit more difficult, so that's why I went with the other one first. So I have my bezel already made. I have my Tory already made, and now I'm going to take some wire, and again, this could be whatever gauge you want it to be, but this is your bale, so you don't want to make it too skinny. So what I'm going to do here is I'm using 14 gauge, and I just have a transfer punch. You can use any kind of mandrel. Normally I used to use my soldering pick, but I have this pick that has a rubber handle now, so it won't slide off, so don't do that. So I just have a mandrel. It could be pencil, pen, mandrel, pick, but I have about 12 inches. You could go smaller if you want. And I've balled the ends like we did previously. And I take it in the center and I just start coiling it around this piece. And this is supposed to be a grapevine, so it's not supposed to be a perfectly marching soldier coil. It's supposed to be kind of randomly close together, far apart, and you've got a bale. And you can take your pliers and tweak the ends. You can make it curved. You can do whatever you want, and it's nice. I usually do, that's about an 8 millimeter, between an 8 and a 10 millimeter opening. That way I can put sari ribbons through. I can put kumihimo. You can do your crochet. You have options of what you're going to put inside here. So I usually make them nice and large. So I have this, and this is going to attach to this. So what we're going to do, again, we're going to use the pumice because we want to get this in the center of this, not on the bottom. We want to get it in the center. And the dime trick doesn't work as well on this because this being round, when I hit it with the torch, it tends to want to roll. So this keeps it from rolling. And so what I'm going to do here is I have it positioned so that my coil touches in several spots. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to tack. Now, if you choose to use a very thin wire for this, you've got to be careful because it will melt very quickly, and it gets to a much hotter temperature before your braise and before your Tory bar. So keep that in consideration. We're going to take our brazing rod and position it. Get all of your burn meltables away. We're going to start this. And so I'm going to come out here to this side again, and I've got my braise in the vicinity of the heat. I'm getting my two components nice and warm. Notice my torch is not directly over my metals at any time because I'm using those circles of heat. When this starts to glow, right there, and I touch, and then I touch. Okay, so those spots where it touched, tacked it on there. There we go. And that is on there. Now, this will get attached to this the same way that we did the other. So we put it in here. And again, I'm going to have it touching. Now, I don't have any solder this time to use like I did earlier, so I'm going to go in and I'm going to tack this on. So I'm going to get this ready. Remember, I said this is a little bit more of a difficult one. And the reason I did that step first this time was because it's much heavier metal and I didn't want to melt my bezel. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to get these up to temp because the bezel wire is going to get up to temp through osmosis. And I'm going to, whoop, got a lot that time. Okay, so you get a clump. Just heat until the clump flows. Cool, 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 cool. And lift. The rocks will fall off. And we have this. Now, this is a good time to show you cleanup, because my other piece went really well and I didn't have boo-boos. This piece has boo-boos. I have over solder, I have crunchy spots where the solder hit, and because I got it too hot, the solder flowed into areas that I didn't want it to go, and all of that's going to show. So the easiest, you can pickle it so that you can see it better and clean it off, or you can just go in and clean. The easiest way to do this is to use a flex shaft or a Dremel tool and get in with a small wheel and get it cleaned up. Brazing is much stronger and tougher than solder. So your typical wheels and things that you like to use to remove your excess solders probably won't work as well on this. So what I did is I bumped it up one. My favorite for solder is the brown Kratex wheel to remove, and that's a rubber wheel with an abrasive in it, and it works really well for removing excess solder. But now I've bumped it up to the white Kratex wheel. The white Kratex wheel, again, is a rubber with an abrasive inside it, and it will go in and clean this out just a little bit better. The brown works as well, but this has more of an abrasive in it, so it works better on this. So I have a wheel in here, and I've chosen the knife edged one. It's nice and thin, and so that I can get like down inside here. And we come in, and it will clean all of this off. I have a large wheel on my buffing machine at home, but I still would not use that on this piece because it's very fragile. And so your handheld options are much better for this one because there's really not a whole lot of substance here, and you can really just get it all in a big knot. But you come in and it will do a pretty good job of getting all of that excess off. Now you're going to have some that's still going to be on there because remember, this is not a solder, this is a braze. In a solder, if you remember, it had the two and they went together and they became a bond. Where there was actually no seam, it made one solid metal. This is a tack. This is two pieces of metal being held together with a third metal. If you completely file away the entire joint, then there is no tack. So you have to leave some of it showing, or else the whole thing will just fall apart because you'll thin it out so much that there's nothing holding the tack any longer. This is just to remove any lumps or clumps that you got in there just because your hand shook or you didn't have it up to temperature and it's stuck. So you're going to go in and get this all clean, and then once you get your last stages on there, then it's time to pickle and get this one all set up. But this is another option you have. This is a great technique for building armatures to hold different types of stones, things that you just need to tack together. It doesn't always have to be this project. This just happened to be the project that I chose to show you these techniques. So we're all finished here today. We've done some brazing, we've worked with some copper. I've given you some very basic general studio rules and techniques to go by that you can use in different things. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more, you can catch us at the Beadfest shows and through other venues and the videos that are out. So I've had a good time and I hope you have too. Thank you.
You can almost make anything with tubing. This particular workshop is going to show you how to make a bracelet and some earrings. Just work your way across, flatten that baby out. At this point, you might look at it and go, why the heck are we not just using metal? And I will tell you, my reasoning is because we can, but also because the tubing leaves you a really nice smooth edge on it. I don't have to do any filing or prepping on these edges, and for me that's big. I want you to realize that you can do this, no matter what your experience level is. Brand new people can do this. You don't have to have any experience in metal, in wire, in riveting. None of that is a requirement to learn how to make these fun projects.
Hi, I'm Cassie Donlan. I am so excited to be here today to share with you simple ways to do soldering at an easy location such as your kitchen table. And we're going to cover several projects. It's going to be very detail oriented so that there will be no intimidation, because you really don't need a jeweler's torch to be able to create fun soldered projects. A simple microbutane torch does almost just as well, especially for the projects that we're going to cover, as a jeweler's torch, which makes it a lot less intimidating and very simple and actually really quick to create really neat projects. All right, we got our flux, we got our solder on, our torch is full, and I think we are ready to do some magic. All right, so turn it on. And we've just placed a lot of solder bits in here, and we really don't want these jumping. So we're going to baby it. Take its time to warm up. Check the tip to make sure it's good. All right, all my flux is dried now. We've got the white film. And then I'm still, okay, now I'm going to gently come into the center. I'm not going to focus the tip of the flame on the solder. I'm actually going to put it right in the center of the disc and kind of let that warm up. Did you see how it just started turning transparent there? So we're going to let that warm up. All right. Now we're just going to start aiming our tip of the blue flame right at where the disc. You don't want to aim the flame at the actual bezel wire, because two things can happen. One is your bezel wire can get really hot, like red hot molten, and it melts, and I've done that. And then the other thing is that the solder follows the heat. So if the bezel wire it gets too hot, the solder is just going to move right up the bezel wire instead of going down on the disc is where we want it to go, on the end, on the base of it. So that's just something to think about. All right, so now I'm just going to start aiming on the edge, and you'll see sometimes like we're working in a hole here, that the flame likes to shoot up and kind of look like it's I don't know, expanding out, but that's, you just kind of work around. All right, it's starting to flow. I see some starting to move, getting shiny silver, and I can see it coming out the edges here. So we're getting good. Now this is the other difference I've noticed with the jeweler's torch. I would be pulling out here right away because it's so much more heat's involved that it'll pull it out really fast. But with the microbutane torch, I feel like it's personally harder to get the solder to flow just focusing on the outside and not putting any on the inside.